Okay, my tips. Let's see. Use a travel advisor. Well, of course you should use me.
Yes.
Again, um, I don't really see a reason why you wouldn't. I mean, again, we try to make your life easy so that you can focus on, um, the planning details, the planning side of it. And to be honest with you, whether you have 20 rooms or 80 rooms, it's a lot of work. Guests have questions. They're always adding somebody on. They need to do this. They need to change this. It just is a lot. So it seems like it would be easy, but we're basically taking that off your plate so that you're not fielding all of these questions. And the website that we create, we have tried to answer as much as possible. So we tell our couples, I always say, if somebody's coming to you asking a question, they probably didn't go on your website or they went on and didn't read anything because nobody wants to scroll through and read anything anymore. Um, so we do try to answer everything and take that burden off of the couple. So, again, having the wedding website, that's huge. Try to give your guests as much time as possible. Once they deposit with us, then they can pay along the way. And a lot of times guests need that, especially when we're at these higher price points. For this type of property, it's nice that they have the ability to just email the wedding coordinator and say, hey, I'd like to make a payment. The coordinator sends a link. They can pay $5 if they want. We don't care. But for those guests that sort of want to be able to pay along the way, we actually encourage it because we don't want, for planning purposes for our couples, we don't want all these people booking rooms and then they don't make payments and then come final payment time, they can't pay for the room and then we have to cancel and the couples have assumed they're having X number of guests. So, you
Yeah.
know, and you did, I mean, Rachel, your guests were, and Rachel was very on top of guests and telling guests, like those that were sort of dragging their feet, like, let's go, we have to release the rooms. And for Rachel, and again, this is a very popular property. It's
Yeah.
extremely popular. So in Rachel's case, for those people that dragged their feet, we had to release rooms for any rooms that were unused at the time of the contract. We have to give those back to the property. That's our job to manage those dates. That is not your job. So again, we're taking that off of your plate. But Rachel had some last minute guests and we had to put them on the Ziva side because there was no inventory on the Zilara side.
Yeah. People, usually think you're making up deadlines, but which you kind of fudge it a little bit on the travel agent side, but
Yeah.
it ended up working out. But to the first point on this, like the two best decisions I made were booking it at the Hyatt Ziva and then having Andrea. And I'd never used a travel agent before. Like I was of the mindset of like the 80s, 70s and 80s movies. I'm like, what do I need a travel agent for? I know how to do all this. And I don't know how I ended up here, but there's no way that I could have planned a wedding, even as little as I did in planning the wedding and done the logistics of a travel agency. Back to the Facebook group of these brides that are getting married or have gotten married here. There are a few right now that are not using a travel agent, and 90% of the girls in there are just like, how did you do that? Like, there's just, maybe if you had 10 people, sure. But if you have more than 10 people, like the logistics of that, it just sounds like a nightmare. And I literally, once we signed on with Andrea and Ellen and Sharon, I never had one issue. Like none of my guests had an issue. If they had an issue, it wasn't with us. It wasn't with Andrea or Shoreline. Like there's just, I don't know that it would have been pulled off without you all, honestly. I mean, so organized. And I'm an organized person. So for me to think somebody else is an organized person, it's like I found my people, but I definitely
Thank you.
recommend a travel agent. Yes,
Thank you.
I'm telling the truth.
I know. And we didn't drag her on here just to say that. We
Oh,
did
no, no,
not
no.
rehearse any of this.
This
So
isn't
thank you.
sponsored.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. But yeah, the more advanced notice you can give your guests, obviously, it just helps everybody. Make sure you're taking notes if you're doing conference calls, take your notes. Again, Rachel went down and, you know, she already had booked the wedding and all that, but you can go in and do a preview and you pay a discounted rate to go in for a couple days and meet with your wedding planner.
And that's really helpful.
Yeah,
I'm not the kind of person that would typically book something without seeing it, but I had so much faith after reading all the reviews and, you know, talking to Sharon, who specializes at this hotel, or sorry, Andrea, that specializes at this hotel. I didn't have any qualms about booking it. And it was not only, I'm not saying this like $500 isn't a lot, but it was a $500 deposit. So in the grand scheme of things, I was like, okay, if I go and it doesn't work out, then at this point, I'm only out $500, which is a lot of money. But again, in the grand scheme of things, I was, you know, sometimes deposits can be much more. So once we saw it, I felt a lot better, just like having my, you know, wits about me and seeing the area or the grounds of how everything worked. But that, I think my point was that big day planning and meeting with the vendors was really helpful. But you also can do a lot of that over Zoom if you can't make it. So
yeah.
um, I don't remember what my actual point in that was, but
Well, I think, you know, I would say about 40% of our couples actually go on property. And I think if you have the time and can do it, it's worth doing. But, you know, to Rachel's point, I will not work with certain resorts if I know the wedding team is not good, if they're not going to be responsive, where you're going to get frustrated, I just won't work with them because ultimately it comes back on me and I'm the one escalating and dealing with things. So, um, if you can't make it, you can feel comfortable knowing that the recommendations I give are going to be with resorts that the planning team is very, very good and they should be responding to you right away if you just can't get in
yeah.
to do your own visit. Um, Photography is very important. Make sure you look at sample work. Make sure you're happy. Rachel did her due diligence and she was very specific with the photographer when once she saw their work because this property does not allow outside photography. Um,
No.
most resorts do. So this is one you have to, if that's a deal breaker for you, this isn't the right property for you. Um, you want to speak on that real quick,
Yes,
Rachel?
that was, I told Andrea, I was like, this is one of the biggest things. One, it was about to be a deal breaker for me. Photography to me, other than my dress and probably the people that were the guests that were going to be there was the most important, just because I know that's all you can really take away from the day. And when I originally booked or was looking at booking this, they were starting a new rule for 2024, which is when I got married, that there was no outside photographers allowed. So you are required to use their in-house photography department. And full disclosure, what I saw based on their portfolio was not the style of photography that I prefer. Um, Long story short, you meet with a photographer. I met with him at my big day planning, which is when I, you know, spent the extra money to go down there. And then you have a Zoom, and then you obviously meet with him when you get on the resort before the wedding. My pictures blew me away. And I think that was because I was very specific on what I wanted and didn't want. And I was not worried about hurting his feelings or stepping on his toes. And he doesn't care either. I mean, he knows it's a job and people have different wants and needs. So I'm glad and that I was very honest with him and stern about things that I wanted and things that I didn't like. I went through his portfolio of 20 weddings and 20 different videos of weddings and was just very clear, like, I don't want these kind of photos. I don't want this. And he adhered to it. And they ended up, I can't tell you how wonderful the photos were. Like, I was so nervous about it for 12 months, but I eventually let it go. And I was like, you know, it is what it is. And almost hired a friend that's a photographer to come as a guest just to take candid photos for 4 days because I knew I wanted like action shots of people having fun and interacting. And I didn't need to do that at all. So that was one thing that I was very worried about. And I ended up getting amazing pictures. And a lot of the other brides made me feel really good about that too, leading up. Like, I think a lot of people are worried about that one aspect of the Hyatt and Cap Cana. And it just really wasn't an issue. But I do think being clear about your wants and needs, like you should be with anybody involved with your wedding, was kind of the key to that with their photographer, and they were great. I mean, they were amazing to work with. They were fun to work with. I didn't have any complaints at the end of the day, which was a big relief.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think they do great work, and we get to see all these photos, you know, once they're done, once the couples are back. And I mean, we've just never seen any really bad pictures from this property. So you will, I know it's a big thing, and if it truly, again, if it's a deal breaker for you, then that's, you know, this isn't the right property. There can be other ones that we look at, but
And there
um,
isn't a workaround on that. There is not a workaround on that. And that is one thing I feel like a lot of the new brides that are getting married there, excuse me, ask, because there are some type of vendors you can bring in there as guest. Like I brought my makeup girl in. She was actually a friend of mine and a wedding guest. So that saved me the outside vendor fee. There is no workaround for the photography. Like I tried everything. So that is something to also be aware of if you kind of think in the back of your head that it may be. It's just, it's not.
yeah, and they know what to look for. And there's another resort, and I can't remember which one, but they're like, if we see guests with professional photography, like equipment, they know, like you're not going to get around it. So there's no sense in trying.